So yes, I founded Mellins-Cohen Consulting a couple of years ago, but I'm also the director at Counter. So I can work out how to get to my slides. There we go. Counter. I'm really sorry about the pun. Sorry, not sorry about the pun. After 20 years with my husband, they've kind of become part of my brain. So the Counter standard is an industry-designed standard that was collectively created by libraries and publishers as a way to measure usage statistics in a consistent and really overcomplicated way. The first iteration of Counter was in 2005, and we have been evolving the standard to better address the changing nature of publishing. So yes, we started as books and journals. We now cover an awful lot more than that, but we also now address open access in a way that we never have before. Earlier this year, over the summer, we ran a public consultation process about some proposed changes. And one of the things that came up in the consultation was a feeling that Counter changes all the time. And the NEC team have been kind enough to let me address that. So I'm going to start with a question. How many of you before today have come across Counter? Oh, thank goodness for that. So then the next question for you. How often do you think we release a major update? Nicola's not allowed to say. Hands up if it's every year. Every 2 years. Every 3 years? What if I was to tell you that on average, since 2005, we've had a major update every 5 years? Do you think 5 years is about reasonable? Roughly? Because I think that's not too bad. So, oh crikey, some things are moving, other things are not, I apologise. Right, having established that we are not an ever-changing standard, you would probably like me to stop talking about industry standards. Even I must acknowledge they are not the most exciting topic in the world. Having said that, it's quite rare that I have a captive audience of people who have a passing acquaintance with technology, so I'm not letting you go. I am going to talk about 3 things today, starting with the value of things changing my screen. In fact, completely changing my screen, and I now, okay, I have no control over the mouse and things are happening in front of me, which is wonderful. Can I have control? There we go. I'm going to talk about 3 things, which are the 3 things on the screen. So, the value of standardized usage metrics. I am going to assume, since you are relatively techie people, that you do quite like standards, but you might not particularly see the point of Counter. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about some work that I have been doing with a lovely group of people who are all infrastructure and standards bodies. And we believe that research infrastructures and standard solutions really need to be open and community-led so that human knowledge can advance at speed and with diverse collaboration. And that needs a global research ecosystem that functions effectively. So Counter, but also Crossref, DataCite, DOAJ, OA Switchboard, ORCID, and the Research Organisation Registry, as well as some others, have come together as sustainable community-led, community-driven scholarly infrastructures and standards. And we are committed to providing reliable non-profit services as the foundation of that well-functioning global research ecosystem. We collaborate rather than competing, and we have built ourselves, almost by accident, into a foundational layer that underpins the building blocks for allowing innovation to create new services for all types of entities, whether those are commercial or non-commercial. And those building blocks are things like the persistent identifiers from DOIs and ORCIDs, but also the standards and the solutions like Crossref as a body, like Counter as a standard, and like the open access switchboard. We have open APIs, we are interoperable, and therefore we can build and preserve connections between research grants and projects and research outputs, but we can also show how often those things are used, where they're used, and who is using them in some cases. So, this is actually now moving when I expect it to. So why then do we need a standard specifically for usage metrics? This is now off. Are these working now? Yay. This is so much fun. So we can see why we need standards. We can see why we need shared community-led infrastructure. Counter specifically starts by creating a shared language for everyone from librarians and publishers to technology providers and funders. Anyone who's looking at a Counter report knows that a unique item request attached to the Journal of Scholarly Marvels means that a user has interacted with the full text record of that article from that journal, and that the interaction has been processed according to the rules defined by a trusted industry body that is led by librarians and publishers in collaboration, and that, provided the publisher's platform appears in the Counter registry, the report has been subject to audit and can be trusted as accurate and consistent with the reports from other publishers and comparable over time. That accuracy and comparability is a second key benefit. Librarians really trust Counter reports to accurately reflect the usage by users from their institution. Publishers can also trust Counter reports because they know that their competitors are not artificially inflating usage or tracking usage in any way differently from they themselves. So if you're looking at sales reports and you can see usage from publisher A and usage from publisher B, they are being tracked in the same way. There is no undue advantage in either side. There's also a third piece of the puzzle, and this is a piece that I believe has been missed for many years, and that is usage as a mechanism for measuring impact. So funders, institutions, researchers, they all tend to mean slightly different things when they're discussing impact, but that could be broadly the academic impact, or it can be economic and societal impact. And that sounds ever so lovely, but we're people, and people like to simplify complex matters. And for impact, that has typically meant that we boil it down to numbers. Often, in scholarly publishing, a count of citations. As a measure of impact, citations are really direct. A citation means the work has been found and hopefully read and found useful by a scholar. They're quite laggy, though. It can take years and sometimes decades for citations to accrue. So in recent years, publishers have added altmetrics to the mix, which typically assess social media activity and other online activity. And that's great. They're very immediate, but altmetrics may be very fleeting. Something can get a lot of attention on the days or the weeks following publication because the author's been very active, without having long-term impact. I would say, and I would say this because I think usage metrics matter, or I wouldn't have taken a job with Counter, usage metrics, and particularly the kind of comparable, consistent usage metrics of the kind that we define, are a third type of impact. Unlike citation, usage can accrue from the day of publication, and unlike altmetric, we can be sure that this reflects some form of real engagement with the original content. Having said all that, the usual caveats apply. No research assessment should ever look just at metrics. It needs to be a holistic exercise. So, we did a major release in 2017, and it's now 2022. So, time for the next one. I did 3 webinars over the summer and a wrap-up video on the full details of the upcoming release 5.1. I am not going into detail here. We don't have an hour, and quite frankly, I'm bored of it. I'm sure some of you have heard this before, and you're also bored of it. I will very quickly whip through. The core of the code of practice remains unchanged. The reports that we are asking publishers to produce remain the same. We are not moving away from the platform, title, database, and item reports. They are still there. The way that people deliver reports, so the host types that need to deliver which types of reports, that remains unchanged. And the metrics that we introduced for Release 5, so that's investigations, requests, searches, and denials, not affected. This is why it's a 5.1, not a Release 6. I will quit before there is a Release 6. Sorry, Nicola. She's one of my lovely exec committee members. I'm not having a Release 6. Big changes, though. There are some big changes. The first one is that we are acknowledging that content is used at the item level. People are more likely to read a chapter or an article than an entire book or an entire journal or the whole of a database or watch every single episode of a video series. So we are now saying that item is the unit of reporting. Realistically, in the real world, it's only books that are going to be affected by this. Number 2, we're adding more data types. A lot of publishers told us that 14 data types just wasn't enough. So we're introducing image, audio, video, a whole raft of different multimedia formats. We're also being much more clear about different types of database, different types of educational material. We've got patents in there, we've got conferences in there. Access types. If somebody really wants to see me cry, ask me later about access types. But the summary is, historically, we have not been very clear about where open access applies and how to count it, and we have fixed that. It took 9 months of very regular shouty phone calls to get there, so huge relief. For our lovely techie people in the room, we have sorted our JSON schema. It is much more compact. We have removed the duplication. We have removed the differences between our JSON and our tabular reports. It is a lot easier. And I'm saying this as somebody who can read it but not write it. I think I could probably now write it. It's great. We've also looked to make our sushi, which is the delivery mechanism for reports, much more robust. We're dropping IP authentication and introducing API key, for example. We've made the status endpoint public so that users can easily check whether a service is live instead of just getting a blowback. And we've extended various other endpoints to make things more easily available and readable. And those last 2 things are making item reports easier to deliver, combined with making components optional, because apparently no libraries really used components. They were just sat there making things really difficult for publishers for no apparent benefit. So the whole package of things aimed at making item reports easier to deliver, which is great for open access. And then there's a selection of smaller or optional changes. On the smaller change side, we have a registry of compliant providers. It is publicly available, and we want to make it much easier for libraries to see that information every time they get a counter report. So the registry link for the platform is now going to be included in report headers. We've amended our report naming because it was somewhat offensive. So reports are now just reports, not master reports. And we've defined our versioning process much more clearly, including the timelines, because we really want to make it clear to everybody that we're not doing regular, large updates. lastly, on the optional, well, it's not really an optional change, it's a smaller change, but we are clarifying the audit process and including some optional recommendations for publishers to make it easier for them to get through their audits, should they wish to help themselves in that fashion. There is a very long video, well, 40-minute video, on our media library at this address if you want to go and have a look for a lot more detail, including answers to the questions that came through during the consultation. It's there. Please go check it out. You can listen to my dulcet tones for another 40 minutes. I have no idea how I'm doing for time, but I really wanted to make this nice and quick. So, this is my opportunity to talk to you as lovely technical people about how you can influence the future of Counter. So, many of you know, I took over from Lorraine in April of this year. I have lots of things that I would like to do with Counter. Some of them are very boring logistical things, which I've already put in train. Some of them are some quite big ideas that I think could be really good for everybody across this industry. For example, what if, and I am not sufficiently technical to know if this is viable, what if instead of asking every publisher to process their files separately, we were able to develop a Counter widget that publishers could place on their websites that would track the information accurately and send it to us for processing? I think that would be pretty cool. I have no idea if it's viable, but I would love to have somebody sufficiently technical tell me if it is or it isn't. There's a raft of ways that you can influence Counter. And something that I'm going to say right now is we have a fabulous technical advisory group. They're lovely people. Most of them are librarians, and they do not necessarily appreciate the complexity of what they want in terms of publishers being able to deliver it. So anyone who is willing to stick their hand up for number 5 and as a publisher say, I don't mind giving you some advice in the technical group, that would be amazing. Even if you don't want to be part of the technical group formally, but you don't mind being a bit of a back channel for me to say, is this crazy? That would be amazing. Starting, anyway, on the other side, make sure your organisation's a member of Counter. Many of you are, I can see in this room. If you're a member, you have voting rights, but you also have the option to get involved with our volunteer groups. You can get more of my time, should you want it for any reason, and you actually can tell me, because for clarity, in terms of actual Counter staffing, it's 20 hours a week of me. And we've got some amazing volunteers, including Nicola, who is sat here, but there's not a huge amount of resource. So I love Kirsty saying small team of 15. I can only dream. As I said, we have a registry of compliant platforms. Please make sure that your registry records are okay. I have tried to go through and make them really clean. It's entirely possible I missed something. Let me know if I've got it wrong. Respond to surveys. So Counter Release 5.1. We have around about 300 organisational members, so that's libraries and publishers around the world. And we had our consultation open for 8 weeks. I did 3 webinars that had more than 180 people between them attend, and the wrap-up video has had more than 400 views in the 2 weeks between putting it up and the close of the consultation period. I had 54 responses to the consultation. Now, by Counter standards, that's more than twice as many as any previous consultation. But really, if somebody comes to me in 2 years' time and says, I'm not keen on this thing of 5.1, well, if you didn't tell me, there's nothing I can do about it. So please do respond to surveys and consultations. Drop me an email. It's very simple. I have many, many cards if anybody wants them, or it's not exactly difficult to look me up. No one else has my name. I've already talked about the tag. And the other thing that you can do is stand as board member, and that way you can really tell me what to do, because you get to decide what my budget is, you get to decide what my strategic priorities are, and you can be a scary person that has to do my end of year review and tell me that I shouldn't stand in front of people saying, Counter's been a bit of a mess, but we're trying to fix it. So, since I was told originally that I was going to be doing 15 minutes plus a bit of Q&A, I'm at 17 minutes now. That is my email. Please, ask me questions. Tell me I'm insane. Whatever you need to do. No? Yeah. Just shout. I'll give it to the question.
No, I was just curious when it comes to counter stats between journals and books and thank you. Databases. So, for instance, you mentioned like item-wise counter reports. Like you'd have result clicks and record views, and I forget what those exact terms are.
Yeah.
But there are some of these metrics that I wonder are counterproductive, or in the sense that.
Gotta love a pun.
So you have things like session time. So for a scientific database, you want to get the results as quickly as possible to the researcher rather than spending 10 minutes searching for that information. But I also see librarians looking at that session time and saying, oh wait, this database is not getting used enough because someone only searched for it for like 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. But that 10 seconds could actually be all that they needed. So I wonder if there's something that's happening on the database side that could be useful for counterstats. Yeah.
So, we start with, those are metrics from Counter 4, and they haven't been used since 2019 was the compliance date for Release 5. So we, because of that precise issue, stopped including session time in Counter metrics in 2019 for Release 5, because everybody involved in developing Counter 5 acknowledged that a session duration is not a good metric. So for databases, one of our primary measures is the search, so the number of searches that people do. We also, for databases, include investigations and requests. So that means you've got your search metrics, the number of times somebody has searched a specific database, but also then an investigation is the number of times they have clicked through to view a specific record. And that's, an investigation is any kind of metadata, and a request, so that could be if your database is configured to just do a hover over of metadata, that will still be an investigation. And if they click through to the full record, that is a request. So we have very deliberately tried to get rid of session time record click because it was causing precisely those kinds of problems. We do have a lot of database stuff in Counter 5. I will happily talk to you about that if you wish. But those metrics are very much configured to suit database publishers, but also database librarians. And it was something that we acknowledged was a problem a while ago. So.
Thank you. I have one more follow-up question. So, do you have any plans for, I don't know if this already exists, I'm not super familiar with the counter reports, for measuring metrics for APIs? Yeah.
Yep. So we have a text and data mining. So within the Counter Code of Practice, we have the concept of, not access types, I'm having a brief moment of blank, access method. So regular is a regular user, and we specifically included a TDM access method back in 2019 in Release 5 so that we can measure accurately API usage.
Interesting. I need to look this up. Thank you.
We can have a chat. I'm happy to do that. Bridget.
I can do the honors if you like.
Thank you, Tasha, and we really do appreciate what you do at Counter. What's your predictions for how the landscape is going to change as increasingly things go open access and things get more and more distributed, and we start to lose control of understanding where the usage and therefore the impact is happening?
Okay, so we're now getting into Tasha's wish list. One of the things that I have been concerned about for a fairly lengthy period of time is distributed usage. So there was a very badly named project called DUL, which stands for distributed usage logging. We're really not helping ourselves, are we? So DUL got killed off by Crossref, and I don't blame them. There is a project that I'm involved with called the Open Access eBook Usage Data Trust, and you try and getting that one out. And that is looking at collating usage from many, many, many different sources, but all applied to the same ebook. So that's one initiative that's going on. Something that we've already done in Release 5, but we've really emphasized in Release 5.1 is open access reporting generally. Historically, Counter was always defined for individual institutions. So you would produce, as a publisher, a Counter report for the University of Cambridge. We have the concept of global reports, which are aggregated, anonymized data sets, but that cover the entire world's usage of a publisher's content. So that helps with open access reporting because you can show total usage of your content. And I know PLOS is already doing that, as are several other publishers. PLOS is just on my mind because Ian's right there. What I would love to start seeing is groups like Web of Science, like Scopus, like PubMed, actually delivering counter-compliant usage reports back to publishers, because publishers are giving them content that they are then leveraging for money. And as a publisher, and I was a publisher for a long time, I spent a lot of years asking these groups to tell me how much usage my content was getting on their platforms, and they point blank refused to do so and sometimes wouldn't even speak to me about it. I think this is a really basic thing that we can and should be encouraging aggregators to do as much as possible, is to report back to publishers on how their content is doing. Apart from anything else, it's good for the aggregators because it means the publishers can generate more of the really good content that gets a lot of usage. That, I think, will become even more important as open access becomes ever more widespread and content is disseminated across wider and wider platforms. Any more? Kim.
Thanks, Tasha. So I might be behind the times and you may already be able to do this, but when, as somebody who publishes journals with articles predominantly, and we have metrics on each article, so we have the article level metrics, usually in terms of abstract views, PDF downloads, HTML full text views. Can we get counter data in those instead of platform data?
So I have asked some of the platforms about this and they've kind of gone, oh, I didn't think of that. So that requires the platforms to have global reports and global item reports specifically. There is no technical reason not to. I would love to see that happening. And if anybody wants to do that as a project and wants me to help them with it, I am all over that. I would say your total and unique item requests are the metrics to go for, possibly also the investigations. Yes, it's feasible. As far as I'm aware, none of the big corporate platforms have yet done it.
I'll ask.
I was not expecting this many questions. Are we good? Yay. Thanks, everybody.